And going for the Maxim Vachilik-Rav approach of snacking up during the game.
Tara gets it right, and here we go. Yay! And I am the first one with the right move, you guys. Yay! We have started. This is the Champions Chess Tour 2023.
But here we go. Robert was also correct with his prediction of the Catalan. So you two take the points. Tanya, we need to up our game.
Teamwork makes the dream work.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Good start. Good start. What are we seeing on the board, you guys?
So this is one of the main lines of the Catalan opening. This is played by a bunch of top players in the world. Seemingly everyone has it in their repertoire right now. White tries to occupy some of the center, but black is rock solid. Look at black's pawn structure in the middle. It's what we call the triangle pawn setup, just controlling lots of squares. Black does have one problem piece in these positions. It is that black bishop, the light square bishop on c8. It tends to struggle to get out. It's often a battle, the middle game, that we will be about to see, of whether black can activate that piece. And this is still very well trodden, this path. I guess the idea behind this one, Tanya, is to free up the square on d2 for the white knight. But there we go. We see on the live board he has played it, getting ready to park the knight on d2, which is actually its dream square. And after black castles, I would be shocked again if Magnus doesn't go for that. But now knight bd2 would support a pawn push. And looks like on my board we've seen something really creative from Magnus. It hasn't popped up just yet, but this would be what I would go for if I were white. Let's go back to the players and what has Magnus got up his sleeve?
Well, you said creative, so I'm guessing it's Harry the H-pawn.
Yep.
That must be it. And it comes from the school of Daniil Dubov. Dubov was one of the trainers for Magnus Carlsen during his World Championship matches. And Dubov is kind of the king of the Catalan. He loves this opening. He plays it with great effect. So the move h2 to h4, throwing that pawn up the board. It doesn't have an immediate threat, but it just can be a bit scary for black to deal with.
We see it.
Yeah, there you go. Robert, he's definitely been hanging out with Daniil Dubov a bit too much recently, Magnus Carlsen. The white king now has the question to answer long term. Does it castle short? Does it castle on the king side? Now that you've started pushing pawns on that flank, or do you just stay in the center, keep your opponent guessing? That's something that Kai has mentioned in the past, especially last season on the tour. It's a definite trend at the top level to keep your opponents guessing, to kind of play a bit risky.
And you definitely have to watch out for that. This is ambitious play by Magnus, and we see Sarana go for the option of b6, still keeping flexibility in the center. At some point, I am expecting a pawn trade to try and open up some files. Your opponent goes for the flank attack. You try to open on the center, try that on castle king, put pressure on that. And as the pieces develop, I think the way for black here, David, is often to just take out the bishop on c8, get it to b7, trade the pawn on c4, pick that pawn up, put your knight on d5, and try to create play in the center, as long as white's king is not castled.
Yeah, so this looks like it's a very logical plan. Instead, Sarana has developed his bishop. And, OK, we're waiting for Magnus to move now.
Something I like to point out is that knight on d7, right in front of the queen, it's dominated by the pawn on d4. So when there's a pawn 3 squares away from a knight, the knight is in some trouble. So I do like the contours of the position for white, because that black knight's a bit passive. So playing the move e4, it's very common, it's a topical idea, but you offer some trades, and that's usually good for the side with less space. That knight on d7, the knight on f6 fighting for the same squares, called superfluous knights, thanks to Jeremy Silman. So I do think we'll see a series of trades, and the knight on d7 will become a happier piece.
Yeah, finally the knight can start to breathe. But instead of capturing this pawn, Magnus says, no, I'm going for the attack. He brings his knight forward. Of course, this pawn will disappear long term. It's now attacked 4 times. The white bishop is open towards it. But he's also hinting at a potential attack on this square. Look how the queen's vision, long X-ray vision there, is potentially going to hit the h7 pawn. And Sarana doesn't even blink. He's playing so quickly against this really creative idea. He plays c5. Again, if your opponent attacks one side, fight back in the center.
This is a brand new position. It's never happened before. So they are playing over the board. This move by Magnus going knight to g5, attacking on e4. And now he blocks off the center, blocks off that bishop on b7. This pawn advance is a very typical way of getting back to the position after black has made the move c5. You want to keep it blocked, and you want to keep pressure on e4. I like this approach of not allowing black to capture on d4 and opening up the center.
Taking that pawn on d5, and that has just happened. E takes d5 was played. White has to take back with the pawn. And if we get some trades on that square, white will then castle queenside at long last. And black will be up 2 pawns, but white has the initiative. The momentum is in the favor. There's a pin down the d file. The e4 pawn will be hanging. Maybe there's some better moves along the way. Maybe castling king was not strong as just bringing the rook to d1. But either way, we see how quickly white's pieces come into the flow of the position.
Yeah, and just to go one or two moves further, if the black bishop drops back, we can, for example, take this pawn simply with our bishop. And look at this, already devastating threats on the board. This is a huge threat of checkmate. The black king not entirely safe. And actually, I don't really see how to prevent this.
It might be the only way forward. David, this threat that you pointed out of d6, and look at this, Sarana chooses another path of vacating a square for the bishop on f6 with the move knight to h5, and the bar hates it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the bar hates this move. We have to try and figure out why. Of course, it's not just because knights on the rim are dim. That could be one explanation, of course, but it must be something concrete, something specific to this position that makes the engine hate this last decision so much by Sarana. I'm trying to figure it out. It feels like white has a bunch of ways to create a double attack, but no, Magnus just takes a timeout and drops his bishop back. He's been tanking for a while, and wow, Robert, he goes for the move you suggested. Logical, but it does come at a cost, and Magnus jumps in instantly. He doesn't hesitate to drop his knight on that beautiful e6 square. That is a fork. You've got to move the queen. The queen was the more valuable of the two pieces. She runs away, but here Magnus, again, spoiled for choice. That white knight is so glorious, so beautiful. Do you even trade it for a rook? Yes, you win material, but maybe you want to keep it on that square. We call it an octopus knight with its tentacles all over the board. That white knight is a real thorn in black's side, and I wouldn't be shocked if Magnus just ignores it, just castles queenside and says, OK, the attack continues.
And you want to break that, and has he gone for it?
Tanya.
He does it. He does it instantly. Robert, he doesn't care about the king's safety. He says, I'm coming for your king instead. G4, and I see the eval bar loves it on the board. This has exploded already, hitting that knight, hitting that pawn. If you capture on G4, all white wants is to take on E4 and hit that pawn on H7. And it's really all about the black king. That knight on E6 is way worth more than an exchange.
Yeah, this one looking difficult. What's your philosophy, Robert, Tanya, when you're really struggling, when you know your opponent's almost got it in the bag, but you have to survive, you have to fight back?
As long as he can shore up and prevent the immediate threats, he does have a chance in this game. And we see Magnus just take this pawn on e4 with the bishop, creating a threat against the h7 pawn. But the evaluation bar is taking a little bit of a dip. A knight can come out to f6. There is activity for black's pieces, and that's the best news of all.
Yeah. And at least his next couple of moves are very natural. He did bring a knight to f6 as a bit of a defensive rock there. Black's knights, superfluous perhaps, but they do control and defend, cover some really important squares. Magnus eventually, after resisting the temptation for a few moves, he has gone to grab the material. So white has won that rook for his knight. He's currently 1 point up if we do a count, but yeah, it's more about the piece activity. White has nice centralization. Black needs to just lock things down. And I like this last move by Sarana, planting the black bishop on d6, the dark square bishop, blockading white's central pawn. You cannot allow that one to advance. It would be too strong. It would win the game. And he seems to have done a good job of at least covering things for now, holding things together. Do we think Magnus has a breakthrough now, or is he just going to improve his pieces as we see in front of us?
David, as you were talking about the approach in such difficult positions, I think your mindset just has to be to survive another move. Yeah. You just have to make sure that you're not losing on the spot and keep pushing your opponent to find ways, because the hardest thing in chess is to win a winning position. We've seen even Magnus sometimes not being able to do it. So that is what Sarana's trying to do. He's trying to keep himself in the game, but it's going to be hard, this one.
Because I asked him something about Magnus. He only needs a draw. And Henrik said, it is very difficult to get a draw in chess. And of course it is. And it must be even harder to, as you say, win a winning position.
Extremely well. I think that's what sets the modern generation apart from past years. Thanks to engines, we've all learned that there are resources in positions. And I do want to mention just a couple of moves ago, the experience of these two, especially in speed chess, has shone through by the fact they both put their kings towards the corner. Black took a timeout to shuffle his king into the corner. Magnus, even though he's the one attacking with white, took a timeout, put his king on a safer square. And that's just because later you don't want to have to calculate checks, attacks, and direct threats. But talking of direct threats, that rook on e6 now, the white rook has landed on a square that the white knight used to occupy, but still an outpost, still defended by white's passed pawn in the center, and of course by his bishop. And even if black trades off that rook, it will just be replaced by an equally powerful pawn.
Yeah, Magnus has so many intruders in the black camp right now.
Yeah, and those intruders are only going to start eroding the black position further. I do wonder if Magnus can start upping the pressure. I'm not sure whether you have time to bring your rook, kind of park it, doubled rooks there. Instead, Magnus centralizes his knight. Wow, nice move. And adding even more pressure onto those two kind of most important defenders. exchanging pieces as well, as Robert mentioned, helping when you're ahead on material. Getting off to a fast start earlier, Sarana shaking his head. He's normally ice cold, emotionless, and fearless, but Sarana shaking his head there. He has played bishop to f4, trying to trade off these pieces, perhaps, these bishops. But will that help him? This pawn has also been freed up to start advancing in the near future. Not right now, perhaps, but some calculation to be done for Magnus. Yeah, some big developments potentially in that game. And, of course, we've seen the bar all up in White's favour in this game, too, for a long time now. And Tanya predicted the future yet again, and a capture of Black's defender, that knight on f6. And it is replaced, but that knight, the second knight, will also disappear any second now.
And what's interesting is that I don't remember these two teenagers playing against each other.
That's
so
interesting.
This could be the first time this matchup is happening.
But meanwhile, Magnus planting that white queen in the centre. Black's bishop is plugging all the holes. That dark square bishop now for Black, but it could be removed at any moment first. Magnus gobbles up a pawn. He's getting ready to throw the white f-pawn forward to destabilise that black bishop in the centre. And this one looks like we're coasting now towards victory for Magnus Carlsen. It's looking hopeless. Also down under 2 minutes for Sarana. What does he play? He pushes a pawn forward. This doesn't change anything, however. He's looking for counterplay. He's pushing pawns towards the white king, but he's so far away. He needs 3 or 4 moves to create a single threat, and Magnus will land a punch before that.
To the 7th rank. So let's say you start with the move queen h5. It's on the board. You're threatening a mate in 1, and Sarana has to defend that with the queen, losing control of the d6 square, after which, let's say, queen goes to g7, defending the mate on h7, and a move like d6 would be absolutely devastating, coming in with the rook on the 7th rank, and this is checkmate incoming. Sarana's down to 1.5 minutes, and the clock is not even his biggest problem.
Oof.
Yeah, we saw it in the camera a minute ago. He was just rubbing his eyes. He's like, what's happened? This has just been a powerful display by Magnus, and sometimes happens against the top guys in the world.
Yeah, he was in an unfamiliar position, and Magnus was on the attack. Sarana felt uncomfortable. He brought his knight to the rim, and it never quite got back in the game, except when it was traded off the board in a winning position for Magnus Carlsen. So this is dominance. This is the world #1 player for over the last decade. He's showing his force in game 1, and he's about to lead 1-0. I think resignation incoming.
Yep, I think we have the result. Magnus did get his rook to the 7th rank, and Sarana has resigned.
Wow, 32 moves, and it's over. Magnus Carlsen, he takes the first punch, the first point in the quarterfinal match against Alexey Sarana.